Before we get into today's video, yes, I've been away for a little while. You know how life is. But if there was one thing that was going to bring me back sooner, it was Nick Walker stepping on stage again. We're now just days away from the 2026 Tampa Pro, where Nick will be fighting to secure his Olympia qualification. And whether you love him or you can't stand him, one thing is undeniable. Every time Nick Walker competes, people pay attention. He always brings excitement. The big question is, which version of Nick Walker are we about to see? Will this be the best package of his career? Something close to his peak? Just an average outing? Or could it end up being one of his weaker showings? Before we find out, let's look back at every version we've seen so far. Since earning his IFBB Pro card in 2020, Nick has competed in 11 professional shows. And today, we're ranking every single one of them, from worst to best. Let's get into it. In last place, we have Nick Walker's pro debut at the 2020 Chicago Pro, where he finished 4th. Looking back at this physique today, you might think ranking it last is a little unfair. After all, his midsection looked more than respectable back then. I'd actually go as far as saying it was one of his biggest strengths, especially compared to today, where it's undeniably his biggest weakness. Knowing how his physique evolved over the years, it's easy to look at this version more favorably because of that tight waist and those deep, well-defined abs. But make no mistake, this was still a respectable pro debut. At the same time, it was a 4th place finish at what was, overall, a mid-tier pro show, and that tells you a lot about where he stood at the time. He simply didn't have the muscle maturity, the pop, or the level of detail that he would display just 1 year later. His posing was still a work in progress, and his back poses were nowhere near the world-class standard they would eventually reach. So while this was an impressive first outing as a professional, Nick Walker's physique at the 2020 Chicago Pro takes the 11th spot in today's ranking. In 10th place, we have Nick Walker's most recent Olympia appearance from last year. Heading into the contest, Nick was considered one of the favorites, but he ended up finishing a disappointing 6th. Many people even argued that 6th was too high. The biggest issue with this version was conditioning. This was by far the least conditioned Nick Walker we've ever seen on an Olympia stage. To his credit, he looked a bit better during the Saturday night finals, and I actually thought he looked better than several competitors who ultimately finished ahead of him, but there's no denying it. Outside of his pro debut, this is Nick Walker's least impressive physique to date. In my opinion though, it still ranks ahead of his 2020 Chicago Pro debut. The added muscle mass, the more polished posing, and especially the improvements to his back poses are enough to give this version the edge. That's why I have it in 10th place with only his pro debut ranking below it. In 9th place, we have Nick Walker's Olympia debut from 2021. Ironically, 2021 was probably Nick Walker's best year. He won both the New York Pro and the Arnold Classic, the two biggest titles outside of the Olympia, and then followed that up with a very respectable 5th place finish in his Olympia debut. However, we're comparing Nick against himself in this video, and this version simply doesn't stack up as well as the ones that rank above it. The biggest issue was that he came in too flat. He lost a lot of the fullness and pop he displayed just a few weeks earlier at the Arnold Classic. Because he lacked that fullness, two of his biggest weaknesses became more obvious than ever, his chest and his lower body. Both looked undersized relative to the rest of his physique, and that hurt his overall balance. Make no mistake though, even though this version ranks only 9th on my list, the differences between these physiques are often very small. A few minor improvements could easily have pushed this package into the top 5. After all, we're comparing 11 versions of the same bodybuilder, so don't expect massive differences from one placing to the next. In 8th place, we have Nick Walker's 2024 New York Pro, his comeback physique after missing the 2023 Olympia because of that hamstring injury just days before the show. Unfortunately, the comeback didn't quite live up to the expectations. A lot of people believed Nick could have won the 2023 Mr. Olympia had it not been for that injury. But in New York, he found himself in a much tougher battle than many expected against the rising Martin Fitzwater. In fact, plenty of fans thought Martin should have won that contest. Personally, I think Nick was better than many people give him credit for. But it's all about perspective, and compared to the expectations surrounding his return, he simply under-delivered. The biggest issue was his growing midsection, which more often than not looked out of control and took away from the overall flow of his physique. The good news is that the trademark Nick Walker muscle density and conditioning were still there. However, the expanded waistline was enough to hold this version back, which is why I have his 2024 New York Pro Physique in 8th place. In 7th place, we have Nick Walker's 2021 New York Pro. Less than a year after his pro debut in Chicago, Nick shocked the bodybuilding world by winning the 2021 New York Pro in dominant fashion. Compared to his debut, he had already made noticeable improvements in conditioning, posing, and overall muscle maturity. He looked like someone who could already challenge the best in any lineup. His midsection was especially impressive. Again, knowing what would happen in the years that followed, it's easy to appreciate just how tight his waist and abs were at this stage of his career. Looking only at the front poses, you could easily argue that this version deserves to be ranked higher. However, his back poses and especially his lower body were nowhere near the level they would eventually reach. From virtually every angle, his legs still lacked the size and detail that later became one of his biggest strengths. Nonetheless, the 2021 New York Pro was the show that announced Nick Walker as one of the elite bodybuilders in the world and a serious threat for years to come. In 6th place, we have Nick Walker's 3rd New York Pro victory in 2025, where he captured a record 3rd King of New York title. 2025 was Nick's redemption year. Just 1 week before this show, he had controversially lost to Derek Lunsford at the Pittsburgh Pro, a version we'll be talking about later because I have it ranked higher on this list. Here in New York, Nick looked almost as good. The two physiques were very similar, but his midsection appeared a little more relaxed overall. To be honest, there's very little separating these two versions. And that just goes to show how much context matters in bodybuilding. Most people don't remember this physique because everyone's attention was focused on that incredible battle with Derek Lunsford in Pittsburgh. The biggest strengths of this version were his back poses and especially his lower body. Those hamstrings were absolutely outrageous and, in my opinion, might be the best we've ever seen in bodybuilding. His posing also took another step forward. Apart from the front double biceps and the abs and thighs, which still weren't his strongest poses, every other pose looked more polished than in previous years. Overall, this was another elite version of Nick Walker, but a slightly softer midsection keeps it just outside my top 5. Now we're into the top 5 and honestly, this is where things get really difficult. I genuinely think these 5 versions could be ranked in almost any order. The gap between 5th and 1st is incredibly small. It all comes down to what you value more. Maybe you put more emphasis on certain poses. Maybe conditioning matters more to you than fullness. And sometimes, something as simple as the lighting, the camera angles, or even the video quality can completely change how a physique looks. So don't take this ranking as the absolute truth. Take it for what it is, my opinion as probably Nick Walker's biggest fan. And if this video reaches 500 likes, I'll make a separate video comparing these top 5 versions in detail, pose by pose, to see which one really comes out on top. But for now, in 5th place, I have Nick Walker at the 2021 Arnold Classic. And I know this is going to be controversial. This remains the biggest victory of Nick Walker's career. He won his first and so far only Arnold Classic title, and for many fans this is still the best version of Nick Walker we've ever seen. But I did warn you, 5th place could just as easily be 1st, and 1st could just as easily be 5th. So before you start typing your comment, make sure we reach 500 likes on this video, because then I'll make a dedicated comparison of these top 5 versions, pose by pose, and explain exactly why I ranked them this way. Now in short, I think this was probably the best Nick Walker has ever looked from the front. His midsection was as tight as we've ever seen it, his abs were deeply etched, and he struck the perfect balance between conditioning and fullness. My criticism of this version is actually his legs. Before his midsection became the bigger talking point, his lower body was always his biggest weakness. Compared to the versions that rank above this one, his legs simply weren't as complete, especially from the back. So yes, you could say I value his lower body more than his waist, and that's true to an extent. My reasoning is that the improvements to his legs elevated almost every pose he hit. On the other hand, the midsection issue mainly affects his front double biceps and abs and thighs. In fact, I actually think his front lat spread improved in later years thanks to better posing, and his most muscular became even stronger as he added more muscle. So yes, I completely understand if you have this version at number 1. Honestly, any of these top 5 physiques could be ranked first depending on what you value most. But for me, today, The 2021 Arnold Classic comes in 5th place. In 4th place, I have Nick Walker's 2026 Arnold Classic Physique. This is another version that many people consider to be his best ever. Nick finished 2nd behind Andrew Jacked in what many considered a controversial decision. More importantly, this was the first time in his career that he managed to defeat Hadi Choopan. And honestly, if we completely ignored his waist control, I think this would be Nick Walker's best package to date. He was the biggest he'd ever been, absolutely shredded, and showcased what I believe are the best back poses in bodybuilding today. It's incredibly difficult to overlook someone who's both the biggest and the most conditioned man on stage at the same time. Unfortunately for Nick though, his waist was simply too relaxed at times. That gave the judges an opening to mark him down, especially knowing that his structure has never been the type they traditionally reward. Now, in the footage you're watching here, his waist actually looks fairly controlled. But if you go back and watch the comparison rounds, you can clearly see it becoming more and more relaxed as the judging went on. That's ultimately what keeps this incredible version just outside my top 3. In 3rd place, I have Nick Walker's famous 2025 Pittsburgh Pro Physique, where he finished 2nd to Derek Lunsford. And I'll just say it, I think the judges got that one wrong. This version is very similar to the 2026 Arnold Classic Physique we just talked about, but I believe his midsection was slightly better under control here. Now I know many people say he lost because of his waist, and yes, that certainly became a factor, but the judges initially had the contest scored as a tie, which is why they called for extra comparison rounds. As those comparisons went on, Nick was the first to fade. My issue with that is simple. I don't think the contest should have been tied in the first place. In my opinion, Nick clearly outperformed Derek in the initial judging. He looked more dominant from the start, and I don't think it was nearly as close as the final result suggested. Because of that, and because I think his abdominal control was slightly better than it was at the 2026 Arnold Classic, I give this Pittsburgh Pro version the edge. That's why I have Nick Walker's 2025 Pittsburgh Pro Physique in 3rd place. In 2nd place, I have Nick Walker's 2022 Mr. Olympia Physique, where he achieved his highest placing on bodybuilding's biggest stage by finishing 3rd. He also took home the People's Champion Award that year. After his incredible 2021 season, Nick skipped every show in 2022 to focus entirely on the Olympia, and the package he brought was one that, in my opinion, could very well have finished even higher. He was bigger, he was fuller, his legs had improved, his back had improved, and most importantly, his midsection was still under excellent control. This is actually the era of Nick Walker that I prefer the most. Some fans prefer the tighter-waisted 2021 versions, like the Arnold Classic. Others prefer the massive versions we've seen in recent years with the improved back poses. I actually think this version gives you the best of both worlds. You get noticeably more size than in 2021, while still maintaining far better abdominal control than we've seen in his more recent appearances. If you've ever wanted to see Nick's front poses from 2021 combined with the improved back development of today, then the 2022 to 2023 period is probably the closest he ever came to that ideal balance. That's why I have his 2022 Mr. Olympia Physique in 2nd place. And that's exactly why I have Nick Walker's 2023 Arnold Classic as the best physique of his career. The more time passes, the more this version grows on me. This came just 2 months after the 2022 Mr. Olympia, and the biggest difference was conditioning. Nick came in sharper here. At the time, a lot of people said he was too flat. In fact, Nick himself has since said the same thing when looking back at that show, but honestly, the eye test tells me a different story. What I see is a physique with near-perfect conditioning that wasn't flat at all. Sure, he wasn't quite as full as he was 2 months earlier at the Olympia, but the trade-off was better conditioning, even tighter abdominal control, and, in my opinion, an even more complete look overall. And one thing that almost nobody talks about is his legs from the front. I genuinely think they looked the best they ever have at this show, even compared to his more recent versions. From the back, he was still improving. He wasn't quite at the level he would eventually reach, but his back poses were already outstanding. When you combine those excellent back poses with what I believe are the best front poses of his entire career, this 2023 Arnold Classic package becomes Nick Walker's greatest physique ever, in my opinion. Officially, he finished second to Samson Dauda. Personally, I still think that was the biggest robbery of the decade, but that's a debate for another video.